What's up, everybody? Welcome back to one of my Friday the Top 13 videos. I know it's Saturday, but I got sick of waiting to make another video. It's been a while. I've been busy, so I haven't been able to get the chance to make another one. But I did prepare my list on Friday, so it still counts. A little while back, I did my top 13 horror films of the 1920s. So I'm going to move on to the next decade. Today we're doing the top 13 films of the 1930s. The Universal's like golden age of horror films. So starting off with number 13, popular film from 1932. Well, I say popular, it's popular nowadays. It was canned by critics when it came out that year, and it's the first full-length feature film to feature the I'm not gonna say modern zombies, but zombies on camera. And I'm of course talking about White Zombie, starring Bela Lugosi. A film about a sugarcane plantation owner who's all of his employees at his plantation are zombies, but the Haitian version of zombies, not the undead version, but the people where they were drugged and then buried and kind of brought back from the dead kind of zombie. So I guess you can call those a classic, like the real zombie. But I love that film. It's great, despite the hate that it received when it came out. I think it's a really cool story, and I especially like the ending, the final confrontation for that film, where Bella's thrown off a cliff. That was pretty cool. But yeah, another classic one of those. The evil guy falls for the leading lady and tries to abduct her, and then there's a big fight at the end. Done a million times, but it's a solid film in my opinion. So my number 12 is a movie that came out in 1939. It's actually the last film I watched in preparation for this list, starring Boris Karloff. You're going to see a lot of Karloff Lugosi films on this list because it feels like they were in absolutely everything that decade. But it's a film called The Walking Dead. Not the modern Walking Dead, but the one from the 30s. So that one is about a guy who was just released from jail. He's down on his luck. He's looking for a job, so he approaches these mobsters for a job. Instead, they use him to frame him for a murder. So he's framed for a murder, goes to jail, gets put on the electric chair, and is killed. But later is revealed to be innocent, so a doctor takes him in and does this experimental new procedure on him and brings him back from the dead. So he's alive, but he's not the way he used to be. He's very slow. He doesn't remember anything until he plays music. He's a pianist, and every time he plays the piano, it's very muscle memory for him, so it doesn't he probably doesn't remember how to play. It's just kind of in him to play. And when he does this, he starts to remember a little bit, and little by little he remembers who his enemies are, who framed him, and then confronts these people. So I love any kind of film that incorporates a musical element to it. You're going to see that in future lists as well. I don't particularly care for musicals, but when there's some good piano compositions or have some musical elements to it, not a full feature musical, then I really enjoy it. And that's my number 12. That's The Walking Dead. So moving on to my number 11, it is a 1931 Universal classic. People might be shocked that it's this low on my list, but this is just where it fell. I'm of course talking about Bela Lugosi's classic Dracula. So I love Dracula. Everyone knows the story. This very eloquent-looking count terrorizes this woman that he desires as a wife, and of course he meets his match in Van Helsing. Classic tale. It's been readapted many times. It's a classic novel by Bram Stoker. And I love that gothic feeling to it, the castles, the sceneries. I just find that there's a lot of dialogue, and it gets a little boring sometimes. Nonetheless, I do love the aesthetic of it. Bela Lugosi is the best role he's ever played, of course, and I feel like every role he's done after that is kind of a mirror of that character. You can really tell it. I guess the Hungarian accent doesn't really help in that regard. He's kind of typecasted, has this foreign villain, but I think this is Bela Lugosi at his best. 1931 Dracula. Alright, so going into my top 10 horror films in the 1930s, my number 10 pick is the third film in the Boris Karloff trilogy of Frankenstein films. Frankenstein being my favorite Universal classic horror character. The Karloff version of it, the films that follow this one, just do not meet that level of excellence in my opinion. But so the third one in the trilogy is Son of Frankenstein. It came out in 1939. This one also stars Bela Lugosi in the role of a debuting character in the Universal world, the hunchback called Igor. And in this one, Frankenstein really is just this lumbering doofus monster. He doesn't talk anymore after the blast from Bride of Frankenstein. He's lost his ability to speak. He really just follows Igor's commands, Igor being a character who kind of pulled him out of the rubble of the castle and presenting himself as his only friend in the world, so he's able to command him and tell him what to do. This film is about the original Dr. Frankenstein's son. He returns to his ancestral home, the Castle Frankenstein, and he begins to, researching his family's past. He's trying to mend these burnt bridges with the villagers who had the trauma of living through the days of Frankenstein and that sort of thing. But Igor has another agenda. He was put on trial for and given the death penalty, which he survived. So now he's out for revenge against these people at his trial, using Frankenstein as his weapon of choice. Very solid film. My least favorite in that trilogy. You'll see the other Frankenstein films that preceded it higher up on this list, but still a solid film nonetheless. One of my favorite trilogies, the Frankenstein trilogy, with Boris Karloff as the main monster. Alright, so my number 9, a film from 1934 called The Black Cat, featuring the duo of Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. Once again, they make a perfect duo in these type of Universal horror films. So this film features a young couple who decides to travel through Hungary, and Bela Lugosi shares a bunk in the train with them, so they're traveling together, and then once they debark, they go on a bus together. That bus crashes, so Bela decides to bring this couple, of which the female is injured during the accident, brings them to his buddy's place, played by Boris Karloff, who happens to be the leader of a satanic cult. This film features a lot of twists and turns. I didn't know who was the villain throughout until it's made pretty clear at one point, but I'm not going to spoil that for you. But I do think that this film features one of the best endings in horror cinema of that era. So, of course, I'm talking about the skinning scene. It's off camera, but still very, very strong and very powerful scene. So check that out. It's called The Black Cat. And for my number 8, it's a film that came out in 1933, the classic Mystery of the Wax Museum, starring horror regular Lionel Atwill, who plays the psychotic sculptor named Igor, no relation to the previous Igor, but in this one he plays a famous sculptor, not so famous, an upcoming sculptor who's displaying his work, and he's visited by a partner of his, a mobster who he owes money to. So the mobster decides, in order to cash in an insurance fraud, sets fire to his building and his work of art. Igor is in the fire. He survives it though, but becomes very bitter and enraged by this event. He starts sculpting again, opens up a new building, a new display featuring some of the works that he had lost in the fire. He's remade them, only this time, instead of actual wax figures, he's been murdering people, coating them in wax, and been putting them on display. So if that plot sounds familiar, that's because this is the film that came before House of Wax from the 1950s, and of course its remake after that. This is the original film with that plot. That House of Wax is actually a remake of this film. So if you like that plot, this is the original piece of work, and I think it's great. That's why it's my number 8. So my number 7 is a film that came out in 1932. I've seen this particular film on a lot of top 10s for that decade, especially at the number 1 spot. It's my number 7. Doesn't mean I like it, I don't like it. It's a great film. It's on my list. Of course, referring to the classic film called Freaks, which came out. It was panned by critics and also famous for the fact that it used actual carnival workers. If you've seen the TV show American Horror Story Freak Show season, you'll find a lot of similarities between the characters. That's because this film was a direct influence on that season of that show. Of course, this is a film where you got these carnival freaks. One of them gets involved with another carnival worker who's a normal person, who's trying to take advantage of this particular character, who's a little person, who's one of their key exhibits on that carnival, on the freak show. And so she decides to marry him and then plans to kill him off to get his fortune, because he's a very rich individual. He's been doing this for a long time. But the crew, the other disfigured, the freaks, if you want to call them, catch wind of this plan and then decide to take revenge on that particular person and her lover, who's the strong man of the freak show. So the classic tale. I think it's very, very mesmerizing. It's a beautiful story, and of course it's very captivating with the characters and that. I think it's really cool. If you haven't checked it out, go do it. Very classic piece of work. So Freaks is my number 7. So for my number 6, it's another Universal classic monster film, one of my very favorites in that line of monster films, the classic Universal monster ones. Of course, I'm referring to the 1933 classic The Invisible Man, starring Claude Rains as the main protagonist, a gentleman who has managed to find the serum or whatever it is to turn himself invisible. So now he's holed himself up in a tavern, and he's trying to work on an antidote, I guess you could call it, to reverse this effect. Of course, before he's able to do that, he loses his mind and starts to kill off people. One of my favorite Universal monster movies, and if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's spawned a plethora of sequels. Of course, this one being the only, I would say, real horror films. The one that came after kind of ventured into the more comedic genre of films, but this one, of course, is a classic of the horror genre. That's The Invisible Man, my number 6. So going into my top 5 now, with my 5th pick, it's another classic from 1932. This film is called The Island of Lost Souls. So this features a gentleman who's on a boat. He gets into a fight with the captain of the boat, so he gets thrown overboard, where he is saved by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Moreau. So Dr. Moreau brings him to his private island in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, and this island, of course, is inhabited by beasts, these animal-human hybrids, all of which are a product of Dr. Moreau's insane experiments. So if that sounds familiar, this is a classic film, of course. Dr. Moreau being an iconic figure in the horror community. This is the first film, and yeah, the entire film feels like an adventure film mixed with horror elements. You've got the beasts on the island, you've got the guy who's trying to escape the psychotic doctor. So yeah, check it out. It's called Island of Lost Souls. Moving on to my number 4, again a film that features the duo of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. another Universal classic by the name of The Raven, where Bela Lugosi plays this surgeon who's retired and has developed a love for Edgar Allan Poe, so he's recreated a lot of the torture devices that are featured in Edgar Allan Poe stories. So he's asked to save this young woman's life with a medical procedure, and he agrees to it, but falls in love with this woman who's already engaged to another younger man. He becomes obsessed with her, and then he's visited by Boris Karloff's character, who is a criminal on the run, and asks him to change his face so that he can avoid capture. So Bella plans on abducting the woman and is trying to get Boris's help. He, of course, doesn't like the idea, so Bella decides, okay, fine, I'll fix your face anyway. So he takes him into his hidden lab and disfigures him, and using it has a means to get him to help him. He says, if you help me, I will fix your face, make you look better. But he's completely disfigured, so now he poses as Bela Lugosi's servant in his mansion. So he has the family of the woman and friends come in for just a party night, and then attempts to abduct her with the help of Boris Karloff. Of course, that doesn't all go as planned, but check out the film to see how it ends. Fantastic film, one of the best in the Universal lineup. It's my number 4, The Raven. Going into my final 3, number 3 is another film I've seen on the top of many, many lists for this decade and for monster movies in general. 1933's classic, King Kong. So the original King Kong, don't need a plot summary, you all know the story. King Kong rules his jungle. A bunch of natives of that island, Skull Island, give this woman to a researcher or whatever to the Kong, and Kong takes hold of her, falls in love with the human, of course, but then is captured, brought to New York, where he escapes and wreaks havoc. Fantastic film. I don't disagree with anyone who has it at the top of its list. For me, it's just the motion capture, which was revolutionary in the time, is just a little hard to get into for me. It looks a little fake, but it's enjoyable nonetheless. It's a fantastic story. You really feel for the giant ape when it's climbing up the Empire State Building and is being shot by the airplanes. It's a powerful scene. You really feel for the animal. But that's my number 3. It's King Kong. Down to my number 2. Number 2 is another 1931 classic. The other classic from that year, of course, I'm talking about Frankenstein. So, story of Dr. Frankenstein and his assistant Fritz. They're out in the countryside, and they're digging up bodies, collecting parts to build this body, and then using the power of electricity, bring it to life. And of course, it walks, it grunts, not a lot of intelligent life. It eventually escapes the castle, accidentally kills a girl, and that sparks the rage of the townspeople. So this is the, in terms of aesthetics, a very pleasing film to watch. I love the Gothic era of this, the castles, the old-timey villagers, and the old cemeteries. I love to watch this one. Of course, Boris Karloff playing the main character of Frankenstein. So another one where you really feel for the so-called villain of the film, who isn't really a villain. He's misunderstood, of course, but he looks grotesque. He's a villain. He's a monster. Frankenstein, my favorite of the Universal monsters. Not my favorite film of this trilogy I was referring to, of course. You'll see that next. But definitely my favorite monster of this the franchise, the Universal Monster franchise. And that, of course, leaves us with number 1. No surprise that I love the Bride of Frankenstein. Came out in 1935, the direct sequel to the events of the first film. Frankenstein survives the attack of the villagers, Frankenstein's monster rather, and goes out into the wild, and where he meets up with another doctor, a different doctor, who promises to give him a bride, and just as an experiment, he wants to see how that happens. So he goes ahead with it, gets the support and the assistance of the original Dr. Frankenstein, and decides to go ahead and do it. But not everything works out in the end. If you haven't seen it, check it out. My favorite of the Universal Monsters, my favorite horror film of this decade, The Bride of Frankenstein. So that concludes my top 13 for this, I guess this week. I'll start working on the next one. I'm hoping for it to be the films from the 1940s. I was looking at lists of films through the years, 1940 to 49, and noticed that I have not seen a lot of films from this decade, so I have a lot of work ahead of me, so I might not be able to get this one out for the next video, but I'm going to try my hardest and try to get a top 13 compiled for you for the 1940s. Of course, this list was fun to make. It took me a while. I had to revisit a lot of films I had seen ages and ages ago, and a lot of films I did not have the time to check out. A lot of classics that probably should be on this list. One of the main ones is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Didn't have enough time to check that one out, although if I ever revisit this list, I'll definitely take a look at that one. It'll be at the top of my to watch for this decade. So enjoy your weekend. Nice sunny days, you can see. And I'll catch you in the next video. Caretaker signing out. Bye.